So my friend and colleague, who's a brilliant law professor as well, Ryan Goodman, you may have seen him doing legal commentary on TV. He has this amazing website called Just Security, right? And he has been maintaining something I've talked about here at the Katie Fang News Channel before, which is called the presumption of regularity. And we're putting that in quotes. And the full title of it is called The Presumption of Regularity in the Trump Administration Litigation. And the reason why we have to put it in quotes is there is no presumption of regularity anymore, is there? In fact, it should be called the presumption of irregularity because of Trump administration litigation. But alas, I didn't have any editorial control over the title. But what it does is it logs the instances of the Trump administration being in litigation in whatever type of case, civil, criminal, or otherwise, administrative. And it talks about how various judges across the United States, different courtrooms, different backgrounds, different appointed from Trump, Biden, Republican, Democrat, whatever, how they are finding that the Trump administration has refused to either comply with orders or pretty much acts like it either doesn't care, doesn't understand, doesn't give a fuck, whatever you want to describe it. And so this website's been just essential for those of us that have been tracking the irregularity of this administration. And I want to go to it right now because I want to talk about, it started September 15th, my late father's birthday, of 2025. And the study that was being done noted that non-compliance with court orders was found in 16 cases. The court's expression of distrust of government information and representations in over 35 cases. Findings by courts of arbitrary and capricious government conduct in 52. Now, Just Security did its first major update on October 15th, and then they just did their second major update yesterday, November 20th. And that day is noteworthy because we're going to go into 3 specific examples that have come up in this Just Security study. But here's the latest numbers, okay? For non-compliance with court orders, remember we started at 16 on September 15. Well, now we're at 26 cases just a couple of months later. Government misinformation, we started at just over 35 cases on September 15th. We're now at over 60 cases. Findings by courts of arbitrary and capricious government conduct back in September, it was already galling because it was at 52 cases. November 20th, just yesterday, over 68 cases. And I'm going to provide a link in the description section of this video so y'all can go check it out because Ryan Goodman is doing such amazing work. But the reason why I wanted to talk about it is there were 3 courts just yesterday, November 20th. And again, some Trump appointees, some not, that made explicit findings about their level of distrust, about the credibility of either Trump officials, Trump lawyers, representations being made in court. I mean, all of the things that you would reasonably expect from any lawyer based upon their oath and their duty and their sense of professional responsibility and requirements. But you would especially expect from government lawyers because they should be held to some measure of a higher standard because they are representing the United States government. And so the breadth, the span, the depth of their power is overwhelming. And yet we are now having this level of numerosity in cases, which is just appalling. So let's talk about 3 specific examples that arose yesterday on the 20th, because I want to have these kind of stick in your head because they not only deal with the disgusting immigration that we're seeing in terms of the policies and the draconian enforcement from this administration, but it also deals with how the Trump administration has illegally and unconstitutionally invaded our cities across the country to be able to nationalize or federalize troops, National Guardsmen and women, to be able to go and do illegal and unconstitutional conduct in our cities. So let's start with the first example. First example was from a judge who we've talked about a lot here, Judge Paula Zinnes. Why is her name familiar? Because she's dealing with Kilmar Abrego Garcia's immigration case. Now, remember, Kilmar's got 2 cases. He's got the criminal case in Tennessee. He's got this case in Maryland, wherein the Trump administration is actively trying to deport him, even though he has filed a habeas corpus petition. Remember, he says, I need to be brought in front of the court. The government has to explain why it's illegally detaining me or trying to do something to me. And remember, this case is specifically been brought by Kilmar Abrego Garcia because Remember, he was illegally deported to CCOT, that horrific terroristic prison in El Salvador, back in March, which was in violation of another federal judge's order, as you'll recall, Judge James Boasberg, who has now since revived contempt proceedings against the Trump administration. But again, Kilmar Abrego Garcia illegally deported to El Salvador, which is his home country that he was never supposed to be returned to. Turns out, after a multi-hour hearing yesterday, Judge Zinnes made it explicitly clear that she has serious issues, as she has previously articulated, with the credibility in the failure to comply by the Trump administration and its officials with court orders. But the reason why the Trump officials got very hot under the collar yesterday about Kilmar's case is the following. Rewind 15 years ago, when Kilmar Abrego Garcia was originally facing deportation, he went through the legal process of trying to combat or oppose that, and he made a claim of asylum, right? He said, if you deport me back to my home country of El Salvador, I will most certainly face persecution, if not death, if I go back. So there was a detailed 15-page order that was entered by a federal judge, Judge David Jones, who was an immigration judge in Baltimore, after he heard Kilmar Abrego Garcia's asylum case. Judge Jones ruled that Abrego Garcia could not be deported back to El Salvador based on his claims of persecution. So the judge says, okay, look, I am protecting you from being sent back to El Salvador. Technically, the time has run for you to be able to claim and get asylum. However, because of gang-related threats to you, Mr. Abrego Garcia, you get to stay here in the United States. And as we know, Abrego Garcia has complied with all of the requirements he was supposed to do along the way. And the order that was entered by Judge Jones, that 15-page order, right, in October of 2019, explicitly said you cannot send Abrego Garcia back to El Salvador. And we know that the Trump administration, knowing that and being told by Judge Boasberg not to do it, they pretty much did it. And then remember, the whistleblower from the DOJ, Arez Ravani, remember he said, it was an accident, Judge. Remember, he got canned from his job for telling the truth. Anyway, the key thing that is omitted from Judge Jones's order back from October of 2019 is the fact that Judge Jones never explicitly ordered or wrote that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was to be deported. Think about that for a second. The judge made all these findings that if he was deported back to El Salvador, he would face persecution, if not death. But the judge never said, I hereby enter this order of deportation for Mr. Abrego Garcia. So Judge Zinnes yesterday, in this 4-hour hearing, says this, quote, there is no order of removal in the docket in the record. You can't fake it till you make it. You gotta have it. You have to have the order. It's gotta be an order memorialized somewhere, and I don't have it. Now, this formal deportation order that was never entered in Kilmar Abrego Garcia's case, this type of order usually says, you are going to be deported to fill in the blank country, right? And so here's the thing. Right now, we know that the Trump administration has been trying to send Kilmar Abrego Garcia, this poor guy, to every single freaking country in the world other than, well, remember, they originally sent him to El Salvador, but they've been trying to send him all over the place, right? And in the end, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is fighting all of it, but he did say, if you have to deport me to Costa Rica. Instead, the Trump administration's like, no, we want to send you to freaking Liberia, a country to which and with which Kilmar Abrego Garcia has absolutely no ties or connections. And what's crazy is that Kilmar Abrego Garcia's lawyers are saying, look, it's a due process violation to deport somebody who doesn't have a final order of removal. And wouldn't you know it, Deputy Assistant Attorney General Drew Ensign, who we've talked about here before, who was also part of that whole Emile Beauvais, tell the judge to go fuck themselves if they try to do something to block us from immigration, that whole scandal. This is what Drew Ensign tells Judge Zinnes. He says it's a technicality that the deportation order is missing. And the idea that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was to be deported was, quote, implicit in Judge Jones's order. And the Judge Zinnes is like, I don't think so. And so the absence of that deportation order means that Kilmar Abrego Garcia could actually apply in a renewed way for asylum. And remember, he has all these pending things saying, I'm being vindictively and selectively prosecuted in that criminal case in Tennessee because I basically schooled the Trump administration and embarrassed them. Suddenly, the Trump administration says that Costa Rica is no longer available to Kilmer Abrego Garcia, and instead Liberia is, which is nuts. Judge Zinnes has made it clear that Kilmer has been to CCOT and back. Kilmer has, quote, no cultural ties, no ties whatsoever to Liberia. He will be completely removed from everything and everyone he knows. Now, here's the thing. The Trump administration put on the stand during this 4-hour hearing yesterday a Trump administration official who had no fucking clue what he was talking about. Even though the judge had ordered the appearance of somebody from DHS to answer questions about this potential deportation of Kilmer Abrego Garcia to Liberia, she wanted to flesh out the details of why that country and all that other good stuff. And so the Trump administration puts this guy in the witness stand, and the guy's like, I have no idea. I can't answer your questions. I was basically told to come and say this. The judge got so upset, she said the following. She says to the Trump administration, this is a pattern of you all failing to comply with my court orders, for example, to produce witnesses that actually have some fucking clue about what I am asking them to answer questions about. At least twice during this hearing yesterday, Judge Zinnes said that there is still a pending request for contempt sanctions made by Kilmer's lawyers about the Trump administration. And she says, and it would be because of the Trump administration violating my court orders earlier when it dealt with Kilmer's illegal deportation to El Salvador. Judge Zinnes is like, why is it impossible for you, as in the Trump administration, to ever give me detailed explanations or to comply with what I am telling you to do? Right now, Kilmer is not supposed to be deported because Judge Zinnes blocked his deportation, and he's facing trial in January in Nashville for his criminal case. So that's just kind of like also an update about what's happening with Kilmer's case, but it's also important to show that you have a federal judge who has been holding the Trump administration's feet to the fire over and over again and showing how they are totally non-compliant. Now, quickly, there's 2 other examples I wanted to bring to you. There's a judge named Stephanie Gallagher. She's another federal judge. The Trump administration improperly deported to El Salvador in March on the same set of flights that violated Judge Boasberg's order, a man who was never supposed to be able to go to any other country because he was fighting and claiming asylum, and now that man is missing in Venezuela, according to his lawyers. The Trump administration says, we don't know where he is, and the Trump administration had the nerve to say to the judge, it's because he wants to be in Venezuela. And the judge was like, oop, time out. It's actually also, quote, equally possible that the missing man, quote, has been the victim of the anticipated violence that caused him to seek asylum in the United States in the first place. This is the judge, quote, this court has seen no evidence that the United States government ever made a good faith request to the government of El Salvador for a Christian's return. This court has grave concerns about the government's apparent willingness to disregard this court's orders. Now, this judge, Judge Gallagher, has not commenced contempt proceedings like Judge Boasberg and how Judge Zinnes is contemplating to do. But what does it say to you that this federal judge says, this court has grave concerns about the government's apparent willingness to disregard this court's order? Now, here's what's even crazier. This guy, Christian, who is now missing in Venezuela, who was illegally deported in March to El Salvador, Christian is part of a class action lawsuit during the Biden administration, wherein a settlement was reached with him and the other members of the class that required the government to resolve their pending asylum claims before they initiated deportation proceedings. Christian was actually a part of a group of people who were actual minors that arrived in the U.S., and so they became not minors, they became of age, and so they were allowed to have asylum claims, right? So his deportation in March not only violated that settlement agreement, was also illegal because he wasn't supposed to be sent over to El Salvador. Excuse me. So the judge said that she had wrongly presumed that the Trump administration would actually make its best efforts to comply with a federal court order. And she also says that the Trump administration has repeatedly defied her court orders for regular status updates on efforts to locate and facilitate this poor man's return, but they're not quite rising to the level yet to initiate criminal contempt proceedings like Judge Boasberg has done. Okay? Now, just as a footnote, earlier this week, the Trump administration has admitted that it, quote, inadvertently deported a transgender woman to Mexico despite an immigration judge's ruling earlier this year in 2025 that she was likely to be tortured in Mexico as a result of her identity. But of course, the Trump administration says, oops, I'm sorry, just like they did with Kelmar Abrego Garcia, right? Oops, I'm sorry. But wait, there's more. You get the Ginsu knives. The next example is this one. Judge Sarah Ellis, federal judge in Chicago who's been dealing with the litigation around the Broadview ICE facility, the detention facility there. She had a huge hearing and basically said at the end, I am now entering a 233-page injunction that is blocking the Trump administration from being able to do certain conduct through its Border Patrol, DHS, etc. officials. This judge says that the Justice Department's evidence lacks credibility, gave as an example how U.S. Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino admitted that he lied about whether a rock hit him before he deployed tear gas in a suburb of Chicago. She also pointed to a U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agent by the name of Christopher Hewson, who lied to the judge from the witness stand, and the judge spoke for more than 90 minutes when she announced and entered her 233 pages of a preliminary injunction. This new PI, this new preliminary injunction, says agents for the federal government cannot use riot control weapons against protesters or observers who do not pose an immediate threat, and they have to give at least 2 warnings before they do. There's restrictions on chokeholds, carotid restraints, neck restraints, or other things that apply prolonged pressure to the neck. That is only to be used if, quote, objectively necessary to stop an immediate threat. Federal agents must display stars or badge numbers conspicuously in at least 2 separate places so they cannot hide their identities, right? And this is because a group of journalists, a group of religious leaders, and a group of protesters brought a lawsuit over the way that they've been treated as they've gone to exercise their First Amendment right to assemble into free speech and protest outside of this ICE detention facility. Judge Ellis said, quote, the unlawful activity by a few protesters does not transform a peaceful assembly into an unlawful assembly. The public has a strong interest in having a government that conducts itself fairly and according to its own stated regulations and policies. Now, of course, the Trump administration says they are immediately going to appeal, but it's just another great example of how we have some judges who are meticulously documenting for purposes not only of the litigation, but for history, what this Trump administration has been doing. It's open defiance. Now look, you like me are probably incredibly impatient. You like me are probably like, what in the actual fuck is it going to take for people to be held in contempt, to be hauled into jail, to have to sit into account for their illegal and unconstitutional actions? I hate to say this, and I've said this before, it takes some time. There is some method to the madness, and I know that's really not an answer that you want to hear, but it is the answer. It's the answer legally, through process, through procedure, and it's also the answer in some ways to be able to hedge against claims, even though they're being made no matter what by this administration, that these judges are acting in a way that is some type of, punishment, which it should be, but that it's just random, right? No, it's not random. Any punishment in this case is going to be well documented as set forth by these incredibly thoughtful judges. And of course, the Trump administration is saying that these are just activist, horrible judges. And what are they doing? These poor people, these poor judges get death threats, and they get threats to be impeached, and they have to worry about their personal safety and that of their staff and of their families, all because they're following the law. I urge you again to go and check out the Just Security website. It's an invaluable resource, but also this presumption of regularity study that is being maintained is really important, because it just shows that there are people that are caring enough to not only document these judges who also care enough, but it also shows that this Trump administration will account. And you know what? As I've said, We need to have hearings of accountability. We need to make sure that when we are back controlling the levers of power, that the people that have done all these bad and horrible things, that they are held accountable for those bad and horrible things. Be mad. Be outraged. Demand accountability. I'm rattling cages in a foreign country, but hey, that's how we roll. I'll see you soon. Katie Fang here. We launched the Katie Fang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.